Please don't go inside.
Never ignore the quietest warning, because it may be the only thing standing between you and the biggest mistake of your life. Victor Hale had built a reputation that made powerful people lower their voices the moment he entered a room. He was known as a man who noticed everything, remembered every face, and trusted almost no one. Yet on that rainy Thursday evening, the one thing he failed to notice was waiting behind the front door of his own home. His business meeting across town ended nearly 2 hours ahead of schedule after an unexpected cancellation, giving him a rare opportunity to surprise his wife with dinner before another week of endless travel. As his black luxury sedan rolled through the elegant front gate of the estate just outside Seattle, something immediately felt different. The exterior lights were glowing warmly, soft music drifted through the open upstairs window, and everything looked exactly as it should. Perhaps that was the problem. Everything looked too perfect. Victor stepped out into the cool evening rain, adjusted the collar of his tailored charcoal overcoat, and glanced toward the front entrance. His security team had already left after confirming that no appointments remained on his calendar, leaving the property unusually quiet. The only sound was the steady rhythm of rain tapping against the stone walkway. He reached into his pocket for his keys, took 3 slow steps toward the front door, and then heard a whisper that barely rose above the rain. "Shush! Please do not go inside." Victor turned sharply. Standing near the edge of the garden, partially hidden beneath the shadow of an old oak tree, was Naomi Brooks, the family's Black Maid. Her dark blue housekeeping uniform was soaked from the rain, loose strands of her tightly curled hair clung to her face, and her breathing was uneven as though she had been waiting outside for a long time. Victor frowned. Naomi never interrupted him. She was respectful, calm, and almost invisible in the daily rhythm of the household. Seeing genuine fear in her eyes was so unexpected that it immediately unsettled him. "What are you doing out here?" Victor asked quietly. Naomi looked toward the front door instead of answering. Then she lowered her voice even further. "Sir, your wife has 2 mercenaries inside the house." Victor's expression hardened instantly. He stared at her, searching for any sign that this was some terrible misunderstanding. The accusation sounded impossible. His wife, Evelyn, had always appeared graceful, composed, and deeply supportive of everything he built. They entertained guests together, donated to charities together, and presented the image of a marriage that everyone admired. Hearing a housekeeper make such a claim felt almost insulting. "Do you realize what you're saying?" Victor asked, his voice calm but colder than the rain. Naomi swallowed nervously but never looked away. "I know exactly what I am saying. Please, if you trust nothing else tonight, trust this one warning." Victor instinctively glanced toward the glowing windows of the house. Nothing seemed unusual. No raised voices. No broken furniture. No obvious signs of trouble. Just a peaceful evening waiting for him beyond the front door. Yet as he looked more carefully, he noticed something so small that most people would never have seen it. Every curtain facing the driveway had been completely closed, even though Evelyn always left them open until bedtime because she loved watching the sunset from the living room. Victor felt the first quiet crack appear in the certainty he carried everywhere. Without realizing it, he slowly lowered the hand that held his keys while Naomi whispered one final sentence that made the cold evening suddenly feel much colder. "If you walk through that door right now, everyone inside will know you came home early." Victor Hale remained perfectly still, but inside his mind, dozens of possibilities collided at once. He had spent years building an instinct that rarely failed him, and that instinct now stood in direct conflict with everything he believed about his own home. He slowly turned his eyes from Naomi Brooks back toward the illuminated windows of the mansion. The warm glow spilling onto the rain-soaked lawn painted the picture of an ordinary evening, yet the silence surrounding the property suddenly felt unnatural. Normally, one of the household staff would have noticed his arrival by now. Someone would have opened the front door, greeted him, or at least turned toward the driveway after hearing the car. Tonight, nothing moved. Not a single shadow crossed the windows. Victor looked back at Naomi, his expression unreadable. "If this is some kind of misunderstanding, you are risking everything by saying it." Naomi nodded without hesitation. I understand that, sir. Her voice trembled from the cold, but not from uncertainty. I would never say something like this unless I believed your life would change the moment you walked through that door. Victor studied her face. During the 3 years Naomi had worked in the Hale household, she had never once asked for special treatment, never spread gossip, and never involved herself in family matters. She performed every task with quiet precision and disappeared into the background before anyone even noticed she had been there. That was exactly why her warning disturbed him so deeply. She was the last person he would ever expect to invent a story. Even so, accusing Evelyn without undeniable proof crossed a line that could destroy an innocent person if Naomi was wrong. Victor inhaled slowly, letting the cool evening air settle his thoughts. Tell me exactly what you saw. Naomi looked toward the house once again before answering. I did not see everything. I saw enough. She glanced at the driveway, making certain they remained alone before continuing. Mrs. Hale dismissed every member of the household earlier this afternoon. She told everyone they could enjoy the evening off because you were not expected home until nearly midnight. Victor frowned. That alone was unusual. Evelyn rarely sent the entire staff away on the same night, especially without informing him. Naomi continued carefully. She asked me to stay only because she wanted help preparing dinner. Around 6 o'clock, 2 men arrived through the side entrance instead of the front gate. They were not family, they were not business associates, and they did not introduce themselves. Victor listened without interrupting. Naomi lowered her voice even further. They never removed their coats. They walked through the house like they had already memorized the floor plan. Mrs. Hale told me not to come upstairs again for the rest of the evening. Victor felt another small piece of certainty disappear. Evelyn had always insisted on introducing guests to the household staff. It was one of her habits. She believed everyone deserved basic courtesy. Why did you not call me? Victor asked. Naomi reached into the pocket of her damp uniform and carefully removed a small wireless earbud. Rainwater glistened on its smooth black surface. Because I found this in the kitchen after one of the men dropped it. Victor accepted the device without speaking. Naomi continued, it was still connected for a few seconds before the signal disappeared. Victor looked down at the earbud resting in his palm. What did you hear? Naomi swallowed. Only one sentence. She paused, as though repeating those words still frightened her. Someone quietly said, wait until he comes through the front door. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. The rain continued falling around them, masking every other sound. Victor closed his hand around the tiny device. It was not proof. It was not enough to accuse anyone. But it was enough to stop him from making the mistake of walking into a situation he did not understand. For the first time in many years, Victor realized that the safest place he had always trusted might also be the place he understood the least. Victor Hale slipped the wireless earbud into the inside pocket of his overcoat and kept his eyes fixed on the mansion. Years of making difficult decisions had taught him one rule above all others. Never act before understanding the full picture. The temptation to walk straight through the front door and demand answers lingered in the back of his mind, but instinct urged patience instead. He turned toward Naomi Brooks and spoke quietly. If someone notices you missing, everything changes. Naomi nodded. I know, sir. That is why I left through the garden instead of the hallway. They believe I went home with everyone else. Victor looked across the property. The estate covered several acres, surrounded by carefully maintained gardens, stone pathways, and rows of evergreen trees that provided privacy from neighboring homes. He knew every inch of the grounds because he had designed the security layout himself years earlier. Yet standing outside in the rain, he suddenly realized there were still places he had stopped paying attention to because routine had replaced caution. Come with me, Victor said calmly. Instead of approaching the front entrance, he guided Naomi along a narrow path beside the hedge toward the detached garage. Rain softened their footsteps against the stone, allowing them to move without drawing attention. As they reached the corner of the building, Victor immediately noticed something that did not belong. Parked behind his wife's silver luxury SUV was a dark grey sedan with temporary license plates. He had never seen the vehicle before. It was positioned carefully enough that it could not be seen from the main driveway unless someone walked around the garage. Victor slowly examined the car without touching it. The hood was still warm from recent use, and tiny raindrops evaporated where the engine heat remained. Whoever had arrived had not been there long. Naomi whispered, "That car was not here this morning." Victor gave a slight nod. He crouched near the rear tire and studied the wet pavement. Several sets of fresh footprints crossed toward the side entrance of the house. 2 pairs belonged to heavy men's boots, leaving deep impressions in the rainwater. Another pair matched elegant women's shoes with narrow heels. The 4th set belonged to Naomi's practical work shoes leading away from the house toward the garden. Victor silently traced the path with his eyes. The pattern confirmed that at least 3 people had entered the house together after the rain began. He stood and glanced toward the 2nd floor. One bedroom light suddenly switched off. A few seconds later another light came on farther down the hallway. The movement seemed ordinary until Victor remembered something. Evelyn almost always kept the master bedroom curtains open during the evening because she loved watching the city lights in the distance. Tonight every curtain remained tightly closed. "Sir," Naomi whispered, pointing toward a small basement window beneath the kitchen. "Look carefully." Victor followed her gaze. Through the narrow opening he could see part of the kitchen floor. A polished leather shoe stepped briefly into view before disappearing again. Moments later another pair of unfamiliar shoes crossed in the opposite direction. Neither belonged to Evelyn. Neither belonged to any employee Victor recognized. No voices followed. No laughter. Just purposeful movement. Victor felt the quiet certainty growing stronger inside him. None of these details alone proved betrayal, but together they formed a pattern that could no longer be dismissed as coincidence. He reached into his pocket and removed a secure satellite phone reserved for emergencies. His thumb hovered over the contact of the one security advisor he had trusted for nearly 15 years, but he stopped before pressing the call button. If Naomi was right, alerting the wrong person too early could reveal that he already suspected something. He slipped the phone back into his coat. "Not yet," he murmured. "First I need to know whether this house is hiding strangers, or whether it has been hiding the truth from me for much longer than tonight." Naomi looked at him with quiet concern, and for the first time Victor realized that the greatest danger was no longer what waited inside the mansion. It was the possibility that someone he loved had carefully built this moment over many months while he remained completely unaware. Victor Hale remained hidden beside the detached garage while the rain continued to wash across the stone paths of the estate. Every minute that passed gave him another chance to observe instead of react. He had built an empire by understanding that patience often revealed what force never could. Naomi Brooks stood quietly a few feet away, careful not to disturb the silence. She knew that once Victor began studying details, interrupting him would only slow his thoughts. After several long moments, Victor finally spoke. "Start from the beginning. Tell me everything you remember, no matter how small it seems." Naomi took a slow breath. Mrs. Hale seemed completely normal. This morning. She had breakfast, answered several phone calls, and smiled when she mentioned your meeting downtown. Around noon she asked the entire household staff to finish early because she wanted a quiet evening at home. Everyone thought she was planning a surprise dinner for you this weekend. Victor listened without changing his expression. Naomi continued carefully. After everyone else left, she asked me to prepare the dining room, polish the silverware, and place 2 wine glasses on the table. About an hour later she suddenly changed her mind and told me to clear everything away. She looked nervous for the first time since I started working here. Victor immediately recognized the inconsistency. Evelyn never changed dinner plans without explaining why. Organization had always been one of her defining habits. Naomi looked toward the mansion before lowering her voice again. At about 6 o'clock, I heard a vehicle stop near the side entrance. Mrs. Hale opened that door herself instead of allowing the security system to announce visitors. Two men entered quietly. Neither one carried luggage, gifts, or business materials. They walked through the hallway as though they already knew where every room was located. Victor felt another uncomfortable realization settle into place. The side entrance required a temporary access code that only he and Evelyn could authorize. Naomi continued, Mrs. Hale introduced neither of them. She simply asked me to remain downstairs and said she did not want any interruptions. That alone felt unusual. Then I noticed something that frightened me. Victor turned toward her. What was it? Naomi answered without hesitation. One of the men looked around the house instead of looking at Mrs. Hale. He studied the staircase, the hallway, the living room, and the front entrance. He was not admiring the home. He was memorizing it. Victor had seen that kind of behavior before in business negotiations involving private security professionals. People preparing for ordinary conversations did not quietly evaluate every doorway and every possible line of sight. Naomi reached into another pocket and removed a neatly folded linen napkin. She carefully unfolded it to reveal a small electronic key card resting inside. I found this beside the kitchen island after they walked upstairs. Victor accepted the card and immediately recognized that it did not belong to anyone employed by his company or his household. It carried no logo, no name, and no identification beyond a plain black surface with a silver magnetic strip. Naomi said softly, I thought about throwing it away, but something told me you needed to see it first. Victor closed his hand around the card. The evidence was still incomplete, but each detail strengthened the same troubling pattern. The unusual visitors, the hidden vehicle, the closed curtains, the unfamiliar communication device, and now an unidentified access card all pointed toward careful preparation rather than coincidence. He looked back at the warmly lit mansion that had always represented comfort after long days away from home. Tonight it felt strangely unfamiliar, almost as though someone had quietly transformed it into a place where appearances mattered more than truth. Victor spoke in a calm voice that barely rose above the rain. If someone planned tonight, then they also planned my arrival. The only part they did not plan was that I came home early. Naomi gave a small nod. That is exactly why I came outside to find you, sir. Whatever was supposed to happen next depended on you opening that front door without asking a single question. Victor Hale slipped the unidentified key card into his coat beside the wireless earbud and looked toward the rear corner of the estate where a narrow maintenance path disappeared behind a row of evergreen trees. Very few people knew that the path led to a small security room built during the original construction of the property. Years ago, Victor had ordered a secondary monitoring station to be installed as a safeguard in case the primary security network inside the mansion ever failed. Only 3 people had known it existed. Victor, the engineer who designed it, and the security director who retired nearly a decade earlier. Even Evelyn had never shown any interest in the hidden room because she believed the main control center inside. The house was more than sufficient. Victor turned to Naomi Brooks. Stay here and remain out of sight. If anyone comes outside, leave immediately. Do not let them know you spoke with me. Naomi hesitated for only a second before nodding. Please be careful, sir. Victor moved quietly along the rain-covered pathway until he reached a weathered wooden storage shed that appeared ordinary from every angle. He unlocked a concealed panel behind an old gardening cabinet and stepped into a narrow staircase leading underground. Seconds later, soft monitors illuminated the small room. The equipment was older than the primary system but remained fully operational because Victor insisted on maintaining every emergency backup personally. He activated the isolated network and selected the hidden cameras that had never been connected to the household display screens. One by one, silent images appeared across the monitors. The front hallway stood empty. The dining room lights remained on despite the untouched table. The library showed no movement. Then Victor opened the camera overlooking the second-floor family lounge. His breathing slowed. 2 unfamiliar men wearing dark jackets stood near opposite ends of the room. They were not speaking. Instead, they quietly watched the hallway leading toward the main staircase as though waiting for someone to arrive. Victor switched to another hidden camera overlooking the living room. Evelyn Hale sat gracefully on the sofa with a book resting in her lap. A cup of tea steamed gently on the coffee table beside her. Anyone entering the room would have believed she had spent the evening enjoying a peaceful night alone. Yet Victor noticed details that did not match the image she was presenting. Every few minutes she glanced toward the hallway instead of reading. Her fingers tapped lightly against the closed book without turning a single page. Once she checked the elegant watch on her wrist before looking toward the staircase again. She was waiting. Victor opened another camera positioned above the rear hallway. One of the unfamiliar men quietly approached Evelyn. Although the cameras recorded no sound, Victor watched her stand, exchange several calm words, and point toward the front entrance before both of them returned to their previous positions. Nothing appeared rushed. Everything looked practiced. Victor leaned closer to the monitor and noticed something else. The grandfather clock in the hallway displayed the exact time his evening meeting had originally been scheduled to end. Whoever planned tonight clearly expected him to arrive according to his normal routine. His early return had disrupted their timetable, but they did not yet realize it. Victor remained silent for several moments before reaching into a locked compartment beneath the console. Inside rested a secure communication device connected directly to one person outside his household. He entered a short encrypted message containing only 6 words. Come quietly. Observe only. Await instructions. He pressed send and immediately erased the transmission log. No names appeared. No location was mentioned. Only someone who had worked beside Victor for years would understand exactly what those 6 words meant. As he turned back toward the monitors, Evelyn calmly stood once more, adjusted the sleeves of her sweater, and smiled toward the front entrance with the relaxed confidence of someone expecting an ordinary evening. Victor stared at the screen, realizing that the woman he had trusted most was behaving as though the next few minutes had already been carefully written long before he unexpectedly arrived home early. Victor Hale remained in the hidden security room without taking his eyes off the monitors. Every instinct told him to keep watching because people revealed far more when they believed no one was observing them. The rain continued falling outside, creating a soft rhythm against the underground ventilation shafts while the quiet hum of the surveillance equipment filled the room. Several minutes passed before the stillness inside the mansion finally changed. Evelyn Hale stood from the sofa once again, smoothed the front of her sweater, and walked toward the dining room. One of the unfamiliar men followed a few steps behind while the second remained near the staircase exactly where Victor had first seen him. Their movements appeared disciplined rather than casual. Victor noticed that neither man wandered through the house. Instead, each remained responsible for a specific location as though they had rehearsed where to stand. Evelyn stopped beside the dining table and gently adjusted one of the empty chairs before speaking to the man beside her. Although there was no audio, Victor could easily read the confidence in her body language. She smiled briefly, nodded once, and pointed toward the front entrance again. The man responded with a small gesture before returning to the hallway. Victor leaned closer to another monitor displaying the kitchen. A serving tray rested on the counter beside 3 untouched cups. One cup had already been placed on a separate silver tray as though it had been prepared for someone arriving later. Victor frowned. Evelyn always served tea herself whenever he returned home from business trips. It had become one of the small traditions that made the mansion feel less formal. Tonight the familiar routine no longer felt comforting. It felt carefully arranged. Victor replayed the previous 10 minutes of silent footage through the backup recording system. The same sequence repeated with remarkable consistency. Every few minutes Evelyn glanced toward the clock. One of the 2 men repositioned himself near the entrance before quietly returning to his original location. Nobody appeared relaxed. Nobody behaved like an invited guest enjoying an evening inside a family home. Victor slowly folded his arms. The evidence now painted a picture that was becoming impossible to ignore. Still, he refused to reach conclusions without certainty. He had learned long ago that assumptions could destroy both trust and judgment. Just as he prepared to review another camera angle, the monitor connected to the upstairs hallway captured something unexpected. Evelyn stepped into the corridor carrying her phone. She believed she was alone. After looking carefully toward both ends of the hallway, she placed a call. The camera could not capture her voice, but Victor watched her expression change completely. The warm smile she had displayed downstairs disappeared. Her face became serious. Focused, almost impatient. She spoke for less than 30 seconds before ending the call and slipping the phone back into her pocket. Seconds later, both unfamiliar men checked their own phones at nearly the same moment. Victor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain outside. Their synchronized reaction suggested they were receiving coordinated instructions rather than acting independently. He quietly opened the property communication log stored inside the isolated backup system. The primary household network showed no alerts, no visitors, and no scheduled deliveries. According to every official record, Evelyn had spent the evening completely alone inside the mansion. Someone had intentionally avoided every normal security procedure. Victor closed the log and looked back at the screen where Evelyn had returned to the living room. She picked up the same unopened book and resumed the peaceful posture she had practiced all evening. Anyone arriving through the front door would see nothing except a calm wife waiting for her husband to come home. Victor remained silent for a long moment before whispering to himself, "The performance is not for the people inside this house. It is for me." In that instant, the painful realization settled deep within him. Whatever was planned for that evening depended entirely on him believing that everything looked perfectly normal, and if Naomi Brooks had not stepped into the rain to stop him only minutes earlier, he would have walked straight into a scene that someone else had carefully prepared long before sunset. Victor Hale remained motionless inside the hidden security room, but his thoughts had already moved beyond the evidence on the monitors. The unanswered question was no longer whether something unusual was happening inside the mansion. The question that mattered was why Naomi Brooks had chosen to risk everything to stop him. He quietly locked the surveillance console and made his way back through the concealed passage until he reached the old storage shed. Rain still covered the estate, and Naomi was exactly where he had asked her to remain, standing beneath the shelter of a large evergreen tree with her hands folded tightly together. She immediately looked toward him, searching his face for answers. Victor approached slowly. "Everything you told me was true." Naomi lowered her eyes without saying a word. Victor studied her expression for a long moment before asking the question that had been growing in his mind since she first whispered his name outside the front gate. "Why did you warn me?" Naomi hesitated. She looked toward the mansion, then toward the quiet garden, as though choosing her words carefully. "Because I could not walk away and pretend I had seen nothing." Victor remained silent, allowing her to continue. "Before I came to work here, my father worked as a maintenance supervisor for a manufacturing company in Ohio. One evening he noticed something that did not seem right. He told himself it was none of his business. He stayed quiet because he believed someone else would speak up." Naomi paused, taking a slow breath as rainwater slipped from the edge of her sleeve. "Nobody did." By the time the truth came out, several honest people had already lost everything they had worked for. My father blamed himself for the rest of his life. He always told me that silence becomes a decision the moment you know someone is walking toward danger. Victor listened without interrupting. Naomi finally looked directly into his eyes. "Tonight I remembered those words. I knew that if I stayed inside the house and said nothing, I would spend the rest of my life wondering whether one warning could have changed everything." Victor had negotiated with executives, politicians, and powerful business leaders for decades. Many had spoken eloquently about loyalty, integrity, and courage. Yet standing before him in the rain was the simplest and most honest explanation he had heard in years. Naomi had not acted because of money. She had not acted because of ambition. She had acted because she believed remaining silent would have been morally wrong. Victor slowly nodded. "You understood the risk?" Naomi answered immediately. "Yes, sir. If I was mistaken, I expected to lose my job. If I was correct, I knew someone inside the house might never forgive me." But neither possibility mattered as much as knowing I had the chance to prevent something terrible and chose to ignore it. Victor glanced once more toward the mansion where warm light still shone through the tightly closed curtains. For the first time that evening, he realized the greatest contrast was not between himself and the strangers inside the house. It was between appearance and character. The elegant home behind those walls had begun to feel unfamiliar, while the woman standing beside him in a rain-soaked housekeeping uniform had become the one person whose actions required no explanation. Victor reached into his coat, removed the secure communication device, and checked the screen. A single encrypted reply had arrived only seconds earlier. It contained 4 words. In position. Awaiting your signal. Victor slipped the device back into his pocket and looked at Naomi with quiet respect. You did not save a powerful man tonight, he said softly. You saved someone who almost forgot that trust should be earned every single day. Naomi gave a small, uncertain smile before lowering her eyes once again. Neither of them spoke after that. They simply stood in the rain, watching the mansion in complete silence, knowing that the next decision Victor made would reveal not only who had planned the deception inside the house, but also who had remained loyal when it mattered most. Victor Hale took one final look at the mansion before making his decision. Every piece of information gathered throughout the evening pointed toward the same conclusion. Someone inside had carefully prepared for his arrival, but no one inside knew he had never crossed the front door. That single advantage was worth protecting for as long as possible. He turned toward Naomi Brooks and spoke with calm certainty. From this moment forward, you return to the house exactly as if nothing happened. Walk through the kitchen entrance, continue your normal routine, and do not look at anyone differently. If anyone asks where you have been, tell them the rain delayed your ride home and you came back to collect your umbrella. Naomi hesitated for a brief moment before nodding. Yes, sir. Victor added quietly, you have already shown more courage than anyone could reasonably ask of you. The rest is my responsibility. Naomi gave him one last concerned glance before disappearing along the narrow garden path toward the side entrance. Victor remained hidden beneath the trees until he saw the kitchen light briefly turn on and then off again. Nothing inside the house appeared disturbed. The people waiting for him still believed their carefully planned evening remained perfectly on schedule. Victor reached into his coat and activated the secure communication device once more. This time he sent a different message. Maintain observation. Enter only on my instruction. Preserve every detail. Less than 10 seconds later, the confirmation appeared. Victor slipped the device away and quietly circled toward the far edge of the property where he had an unobstructed view of the main entrance. From there he could see the driveway, the front porch, and several windows on the first floor. Minutes passed. Through the living room window, Evelyn Hale continued playing the role of a patient wife waiting for her husband to arrive. She occasionally glanced toward the grandfather clock, then toward the front door, before calmly turning another page in the same book she had never actually been reading. Upstairs, the hidden cameras continued transmitting through Victor's private backup network. The 2 unfamiliar men remained in position, moving only enough to quietly check their surroundings before returning to the exact places they had occupied earlier. Their discipline convinced Victor that they were following a prepared sequence rather than improvising. Suddenly the front porch lights brightened automatically as the driveway motion sensors detected movement. Evelyn immediately stood from the sofa and smiled toward the entrance. One of the 2 men upstairs stepped closer to the staircase while the other disappeared from the hallway camera for several seconds before returning. Victor watched every monitor carefully. No vehicle had entered the property. No visitor had arrived. The motion sensor had been triggered by nothing more than wind pushing heavy rain through the front garden. Yet the reaction inside the house revealed something invaluable. Every person immediately shifted into position the moment they believed Victor had arrived. The timing confirmed that the entire arrangement depended upon his expected entrance through the front door. Victor allowed himself a slow breath. He finally understood the pattern completely. The mansion itself was not the trap. Predictability was the trap. Whoever designed tonight's plan depended on Victor following the same routine he had followed hundreds of times before without asking a single question. That routine had already been broken the moment Naomi stepped into the rain. Several minutes later, Evelyn slowly returned to the sofa, her confident smile fading into quiet impatience before she glanced once again at the clock. Victor realized she was beginning to wonder why her husband had not appeared. The schedule she had trusted was quietly falling apart 1 minute at a time. Standing alone beneath the shelter of the tall evergreens, Victor made a silent promise to himself. He would not confront anyone in anger. He would not accuse anyone without certainty. Instead, he would allow every person inside the mansion to reveal the truth through their own choices, because nothing exposed deception more completely than a plan that slowly unraveled while its architects still believed they remained in control. Victor Hale waited another several minutes before quietly walking toward the front entrance of the mansion. By then, every hidden camera had recorded enough to preserve the sequence of events exactly as they unfolded, and his trusted security advisor had already secured the perimeter without drawing attention. Nothing inside the house suggested that anyone realized the evening had changed. Victor deliberately unlocked the front door with his own key, stepped inside, and closed it gently behind him. "I am home," he called in the same calm voice he had used for years. Within seconds, Evelyn Hale appeared from the living room wearing the same welcoming smile Victor had watched on the monitors. "You are home much earlier than I expected," she said pleasantly before walking toward him. Victor returned the smile with perfect composure. The meeting ended ahead of schedule. Evelyn reached for his coat as she always did, but Victor politely declined and hung it on the rack himself. His eyes quietly surveyed the room. Everything looked immaculate. The tea remained warm. The furniture was perfectly arranged. Anyone visiting the house would have believed nothing unusual had happened that evening. Victor looked toward the staircase before turning back to Evelyn. "It is unusually quiet tonight." Evelyn nodded naturally. "I gave everyone the evening off. I thought we could finally enjoy a peaceful dinner together." Victor smiled politely. That was thoughtful. Before another word could be exchanged, Naomi Brooks quietly entered from the kitchen carrying a folded towel. She behaved exactly as Victor had instructed, offering no unusual expression and avoiding unnecessary eye contact. Evelyn barely acknowledged her presence before asking her to prepare fresh coffee. Naomi answered with her usual professionalism and disappeared without hesitation. Victor noticed the brief glance of relief that crossed Naomi's face when she realized he had entered safely. A few moments later, Victor calmly removed the small wireless earbud from his pocket and placed it on the coffee table beside the untouched cup of tea. Evelyn's smile faded almost imperceptibly. Without raising his voice, Victor placed the unidentified access card beside the earbud. Silence filled the room. "I found these on my property tonight," Victor said evenly. "Perhaps you can explain how they arrived here." Evelyn looked at the objects without touching them. Before she could answer, two unfamiliar men quietly appeared at the far end of the hallway, clearly surprised to see Victor already inside. At that exact moment, the front door opened once again. Victor's trusted security advisor entered with two members of his licensed executive protection team. Their presence was calm, professional, and completely controlled. No one rushed forward. No one raised a voice. The advisor simply spoke with quiet confidence. "Everything has been documented exactly as instructed." The two unfamiliar men exchanged uncertain glances before lowering their hands and stepping away from the hallway without resistance. Evelyn slowly sat down on the sofa, her carefully prepared confidence disappearing beneath the weight of the unexpected reality before her. Victor looked at her with sadness rather than anger. "I spent years believing that the greatest threats would always come from outside these walls," he said quietly. "Tonight I learned that trust must never become automatic, even in the place called home." His advisor nodded toward the security files that had been preserved throughout the evening. Every movement, every position, every unexplained visitor, and every inconsistency had been recorded without confrontation or confusion. Nothing depended upon accusations because the facts spoke for themselves. After the visitors had peacefully departed with the security team for further questioning, Victor remained standing in the quiet living room. Naomi slowly returned from the kitchen, uncertain whether she should remain or leave. Victor turned toward her and offered a gentle smile that carried more gratitude than words could express. "Everyone in this house had the opportunity to remain silent," he said softly. "You were the only person who chose honesty instead." Naomi lowered her eyes, humbled by the compliment. Victor looked around the familiar home one final time before realizing that its greatest strength had never been its walls, its wealth, or its appearance. Its greatest strength had come from the quiet courage of someone most people overlooked every single day. As the rain finally stopped outside and the first stars appeared above the estate, Victor understood that loyalty could never be measured by status, titles, or influence. Sometimes the person with the least power was the one who protected everyone else simply because doing the right thing mattered more than protecting themselves.